let's get ready to watch TV. So you folks at home, turn on your TV sets now. There you go. And I'll tell you what, I'll get ready to watch TV. I'll prepare in the way that I do, because we have 41 seconds while we all listen to the opening theme. And I'll see you in 41 seconds. Okay. Bye-bye.
This is the theme to Gary Show. The theme to Gary Show. Gary called me up and asked if I would write his theme song. I'm almost halfway finished. How do you like it so far? How do you like the theme to Gary Show?
The sitcom with turbo power. How could network TV ever run Gary Shandling's show? With his potshots at the sitcom formula the networks rely on, only cable has nothing to lose by airing it. All three networks turned down its Gary Shandling's show before it found a home on Showtime, and if you've seen it, you have a good idea why. Shandling trounces just about every convention of the contemporary sitcom. Rather than play a deacon, dad, or extraterrestrial, he more or less plays himself, a 37-year-old stand-up comic who lives alone in a condo near LA. The plots of most episodes, like his stand-up routines, are drawn from his life. Breaking up with a girlfriend, throwing a surprise party for his mum that backfires. This far, a network might have been willing to go. But there are more important sitcom rules that Shandling violates. Most notably the tendency of sitcom characters to go about their business as if there were no camera in the room. Indeed, as if they were in a room with four walls and not a television studio. Shandling, ever the stand-up comic, regularly steps out of character to talk to his audience. The fourth wall here is paper thin, and Shandling tears it every time he wants to crack a joke at another character's expense or advance the plot.
Yes, it is.
You know, I said let's go, really, because unless you want to stay and watch this, it's up to you, but I say we dissolve to my living room.
They're very fresh. Oh, yes.
It's Gary Shandling's show is one of a small but growing number of programs and commercials that approach television the same way many viewers do, with a large measure of irony. The creators know we know all about the conventions of television, and part of the pleasure of watching is being paid that compliment. Like David Letterman and Bruce Willis, his fellow TV ironists, Shandling makes an implicit pact with his viewers. Okay, he seems to be saying, I realize you've spent 10,000 hours in front of this box and you know every move, but I don't take this seriously either. I won't insult your intelligence, and you can sit back and enjoy.
You know, it would be great to live with Angelica. I think she's great, but, you know, this is a show about a single guy. So you know something's going to go haywire somewhere along the line. It's like, you know, it's like those Bonanza episodes. Remember, Hoss was going to get married, and then the day before the wedding, boom, a wagon wheel would hit the girl. Remember? And Hoss would cry for, like, days and days. But then everything would be okay. I'm going to go to the beach now. You know, Sherman Oaks is really 10 miles from the ocean, unless you know this shortcut through this Christmas tree lot. Then it's like 7 feet.
For all its self-consciousness, its Gary Shandling's show is not, as some reviewers have suggested, simply a spoof. Beneath all the jokes about the artifice of sitcoms beats the heart of a real sitcom, and it happens to be a quite good one. Shandling plays a sort of suburbanized and deracinated Woody Allen. When we meet him in the first episode, he is settling into his new condo after breaking up with his girlfriend. As he unpacks, he neatly uses his belongings to sketch in his character. The turbocharged blow dryer, the lucky underwear, the trick mirror that goes above the bed. Male vanity takes repeated hits. He shows us the backup generator for his blow dryer, and at least once an episode he asks the audience if his hair looks okay. References to TV saturate the show. In an episode in which Gary must decide whether to marry a Guatemalan stagehand to keep her from being deported, he grabs a cordless mic and heads into the audience, doing a nice turn as Phil and Oprah rolled into one. And when he comes home to find his condominium burgled, the scene dissolves to a very funny fantasy sequence in which Vanna White gives his furniture away on Wheel of Fortune. Virtually every episode features a guest star from some other show, always acting in character. Norman Fell shows up in a spoof of The Graduate. Shandling is being seduced by a neighbor's wife and turns for advice to Fell.
Do I have to, in order to get Elaine, do I have to sleep with Mrs. Robertson?
Of course not.
But that's what Dustin Hoffman did.
Yeah, but that was a movie. This is real life. You're in control here.
Oh, man, don't put that kind of pressure on me, Norman.
Of course, George Burns used to toy with the medium like this on the George Burns and Gracie Allen show, but the context was very different then, and so was the effect. For Burns, an aside to the camera was more a holdover from the vaudeville stage than an assault on the sitcom, which was too new and unformed to lampoon anyway. 30 years later, Shandling is working an audience that grew up on the sitcom and is fluent in its idiom. The fourth wall, the emphatically middle-class sets, the silly problems and even sillier solutions, the stock characters endlessly reiterating themselves. In the same way some comics root their comedy in the common culture of the Jewish or California experience, Shandling roots his in the experience of a television childhood. Shandling's tacit understanding with his audience means he can dispense with a lot of exposition. It's 20 minutes later, he announces in the middle of the episode in which his stuff is stolen, and now I have to do this scene with the cop. Since the cop's been watching the show, he already knows exactly where we are in the plot. Shandling has invented a dramatic shorthand that allows the sitcom, normally television's most lumbering genre, to barrel along like a quick-cut action show. You can understand why networks might be reluctant to let Shandling dismember situation comedy, that great television money machine, right in the middle of primetime. The networks schedule sitcoms in blocks, and programmers must have wondered how the audience could be expected to come out of such a flip, self-reflexive half hour and then suspend disbelief before the inanities of something like Amen. Once the fourth wall had fallen, how could it ever be put back together again? They needn't have worried. Shandling's irony, like that of the audience, isn't as subversive as all that. Indeed, It's Garry Shandling's show is as much a celebration of the sitcom as a send-up. What Shandling has figured out about television today is that you can have it both ways. Admit the contrivance, yet still involve the audience in your characters and their predicaments. Nowadays, irony doesn't necessarily chill emotion. Shandling and his generation of TV ironists are onto the fact that even Amen's viewers never really suspend disbelief. Distracted, stepping in and out of the room and the story, they're willing to accept the situation of the conventional sitcom as the price of the jokes. There's no illusion left to protect. The most successful sitcom stars already grasp this fact of life. Bill Cosby and Bob Newhart may not look directly into the camera, but they maintain a certain ironic detachment all the same, one foot in their TV living rooms and the other in our own. Indeed, this stance is the source of their considerable credibility. What Garry Shandling has done is to take the next logical step, formalizing what had been a winking understanding between a television performer and the audience. Neither party need take things seriously for them to work. And now that Shandling has demonstrated that the sitcom and the anti-sitcom might profitably occupy the same half hour, it can't be long before the networks start chipping away at the fourth wall in earnest. Welcome to TV's ironic age. The author of that article wasn't the only one to identify this ironic shift in popular entertainment, and while David Foster Wallace, in his essay E Unibus Plurum, does not posit Garry Shandling's show as the harbinger of this ironic age, he does list it among a number of other shows that exemplify this shift. In this 1993 essay, David Foster Wallace explains how television's omnipresence in modern culture has been the driving force behind the development of a kind of widespread ironic detachment. And he starts by talking about the problem with fiction writers taking inspiration from a medium like television. He writes, "Television looks to be an absolute godsend for a human subspecies, meaning fiction writers, that loves to watch people but hates to be watched itself. For the television screen affords access only one way. We can see them, they can't see us. We can relax unobserved as we ogle." Whether it's writers looking for inspiration or lonely people looking for a sense of community.
And we're going to have a surprise party for her, and you're all invited. Would you like that? Oh, sure. Of course you're excited because you probably don't get invited to a lot of parties, and that's why you're home watching television right now.
Wallace believes that television offers up a false alternative to reality, because according to him, TV watching is a different animal from peeping tourism, because the people we're watching through TV's framed glass screen are not really ignorant of the fact that somebody is watching them, in fact a whole lot of somebodies. In fact, the people on television know that it is in virtue of this truly huge crowd of ogling somebodies that they are on the screen engaging in broad, non-mundane gestures at all. Television does not afford true espial because television is performance, spectacle, which by definition requires watchers. We're not voyeurs here at all, we're just viewers. And this is the problem with writers mistaking television for an authentic object of voyeurism. TV voyeurism involves a whole gorgeous orgy of illusions for the pseudo-spy, and it replaces fiction research with a weird kind of fiction consumption. You are not observing an innocent, unknowing reality, you are observing a reality entirely constructed with the intent of being observed. What young writers are scanning for data on some reality to fictionalize is already composed of fictional characters in highly ritualized narratives. And if you take a step back even further, all we're really spying on is our own furniture. For Wallace, the self-consciousness appearance of unself-consciousness is the grand illusion behind TV's mirror hall of illusions, and for us, the audience, it is both medicine and poison. And so if we take another look at It's Garry Shandling's show, we can see how it appears to subvert television's inherent illusionistic qualities by bringing attention to the self-consciousness. Shandling is very much aware that he is being watched. In fact, the closest thing he has to a catchphrase on the show is asking other characters or even the audience if his hair looks good. If Wallace is correct in saying that due to television's influence, today's culture has become one of watchers and appearers, then Garry Shandling's show is all about the centrality of the appearer, the ego of the star, the main character, the center of attention. But if the problem with television is the inherent deception described in this essay, is this self-awareness not an improvement? Does it not provide a solution to the trickery by drawing attention to it? Well, as Foster Wallace writes later on, television has become its own most profitable critic. Television has evolved to poke fun at its own conventions and trends. Self-awareness is a way of getting ahead of the audience, keeping the viewers who are overexposed to these tropes entertained by appealing to their inner critic, showing us they know how silly it all is, and we can all laugh about it together. Whatever criticisms may be levied at the medium are now absorbed by the medium, incorporated into the programming, rendering it virtually immune to criticism. For David Foster Wallace, irony used to be a critical tool, a way of satirizing the hypocrisies of the hegemonic, but when deployed thusly, irony becomes just another corporate tool, a way of keeping us watching, a way of managing our expectations, responding to trends, to fashions in discourse, etc. A constantly self-correcting, self-deflecting defense against criticism, rather than an effective means of criticism. And the rise in popularity of self-aware media leads Wallace to a deeper point about how this affects our lived reality. It is not I, the spy, who have crept inside television's boundaries. It is vice versa. Television, even the mundane little business of its production, have become our interior. While critics may decry television as a vulgar, shallow distraction from reality, TV can hardly be described as a distraction anymore. Television is a part of reality now. What explains the pointlessness of most published TV criticism is that television has become immune to charges that it lacks any meaningful connection to the world outside it. Television is now an integral part of the world outside television. It is only natural then that television would become self-reflexive in this way, if it aspires, even superficially, to reflect reality.
No, that was just a TV show. I can certainly separate fiction from reality, you know. Well, most of the time. Well, some of the time. Well, I never really could separate it. You know, they're both in color. Reality always comes in a little fuzzier for me, quite frankly.
We see this illustrated in an almost absurd manner in an episode of the TV show Saint Elsewhere, which Wallace explores in great detail in this essay. He writes that the episode immediately follows 2 back-to-back episodes of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The plots of the 2 Mary Tyler Moore shows are unimportant here, but the Saint Elsewhere episode that followed partly concerned a cameo role mental patient afflicted with the delusional belief that he was Mary Richards from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. He further believed that a fellow cameo role mental patient was Rhoda, that Dr. Westphal was Mr. Grant, and that Dr. Auslander was Murray. This psychiatric subplot was a one-shot. It was resolved by episode's end. The pseudo-Mary, a sad, lumpy-looking guy who used to play one of Dr. Hartley's neurotic clients on the old Bob Newhart show, rescues the other cameo role mental patient, whom he believes to be Rhoda and who has been furious in his denials that he is female, much less fictional, and who is himself played by the guy who used to play Mr. Carlin, Dr. Hartley's most intractable client. In gratitude, Rhoda/Mr. Carlin/mental patient declares that he'll consent to be Rhoda, if that's what Mary/neurotic client/mental patient wants. At this too real generosity, the pseudo-Mary's psychotic breaks. The sad guy admits to Dr. Auslander that he's not Mary Richards. He's actually just a plain old amnesiac, minus a self, existentially adrift. He has no idea who he is. He's lonely, he watches a lot of television. He figured it was better to believe I was a TV character than not to believe I was anybody. Dr. Auslander takes the penitent patient for a walk in the wintry Boston air and promises that he, the identityless guy, can someday find out who he really is, provided he can dispense with the distraction of television. At this cheery prognosis, the patient removes his own fuzzy winter beret and throws it into the air. This would have been just another clever, low-concept 80s TV story, where the final cap-tossing and closing credits coyly undercut Dr. Auslander's put-down of television, were it not for the countless layers of ironic, involuted TV imagery and data that whirl around this high-concept installment. Because another of this episode's cameo stars, drifting through a different subplot, is one Betty White, Sue Ann Nivens of the old Mary Tyler Moore Show. It is with almost tragic inevitability then that Miss White, at 32 minutes into the episode, meets up with the TV-deluded pseudo-Mary in their respective tortured wanderings through the hospital's corridors, and that she considers the mental patient's inevitable joyful cries of "Sue Ann" with a too straight face, and says he must have her confused with someone else. Of the convolved levels of fantasy and reality and identity here, e.g. the patient simultaneously does not, and does have Betty White confused with Sue Ann Nivens, we needn't speak in detail. But the most interesting levels of meaning here lie and point behind the lens. For NBC's Saint Elsewhere, like the Mary Tyler Moore Show and the Bob Newhart Show before it, was created, produced, and guided into syndication by MTM Studios, owned by Mary Tyler Moore and overseen by her husband, later NBC chair Grant Tinker. And Saint Elsewhere's scripts and subplots are edited by Mark Tinker, Grant's heir. The deluded mental patient, an exiled drifting veteran of one MTM program, reaches piteously out to the exiled drifting veteran of another MTM production, and her ironic rebuff is scripted by KM personnel, who accomplished the parodic undercut of MTM's Dr. Auslander with the copyrighted MTM hat gesture of one MTM veteran who's deluded he's another. Dr. Auslander's Fowler-esque dismissal of TV as just a distraction is less absurd than incoherent. There is nothing but television on this episode. Every joke and dramatic surge depends on involution, meta-television. It is in-joke within in-joke. Which is why, according to David Foster Wallace, it is now nonsensical to dismiss television as a distraction from reality. Television is our reality. If it was not, then the in-jokes of this episode would be incomprehensible. They rely on our knowledge of the medium. Since television must seek to compel attention by offering a dreamy promise of escape from daily life, and since stats confirm that so grossly much of ordinary US life is watching TV, TV's whispered promises must somehow undercut television watching in theory. There's a world where life is lively, where nobody spends 6 hours a day unwinding before a piece of furniture, while reinforcing television watching in practice. Your best and only access to this world is TV. If television can invite the viewer into itself via in-gags and irony, it can ease that painful tension between the viewer's need to transcend the crowd and his status as audience member. For to the extent that TV can flatter the viewer about seeing through the pretentiousness and hypocrisy of outdated values, it can induce in him precisely the feeling of canny superiority it's taught him to crave, and can keep him dependent on the cynical TV watching that alone affords this feeling. This kind of ironic media encourages critical paralysis. We needn't improve or develop the medium, we need only comment on what already is, providing the viewer with a healthy dose of self-satisfaction. I am not like those other naive viewers mindlessly consuming this trash. I'm in on the joke. I'm watching ironically. So a TV series like Gary Shandling's show does not really mark the beginning of an ironic age, rather it marks the death of irony, the beginning of an age in which this kind of ironic reflexivity is almost taken for granted, because it constitutes such an integral part of our everyday life, a life of watchers and appearers, an age in which irony is popularized, institutionalized, rendered impotent. But long before Gary Shandling's show, there was The Strange World of Gurney Slade, a 6-episode British series released all the way back in 1960. And while Gary Shandling seems perfectly comfortable having a live audience in his living room, Gurney Slade's relationship with the viewer is much more ambivalent.
Now leave me alone. Switch me off. I've got a right to my own privacy. I'm going to live my own life. Switch off.
This series is a way more complicated beast than Gary Shandling's show, because while the opening scene may break the fourth wall in one way, having an actor leave the set of a sitcom mid-scene, the show isn't about an actor. It's about Gurney Slade, a character who exists on multiple planes of fiction at once. He starts out as an actor, and then ends up as a puppet controlled by Anthony Newley, the actor who plays Gurney Slade. And between these 2 points, Gurney fluctuates between different levels of reality. One minute he's wandering around a seemingly ordinary street on a seemingly ordinary day, the next he's delving into his own mind, or reuniting with the characters from previous episodes as they await their turn to be reassigned to a different show. The underlying feature of The Strange World of Gurney Slade is that the show has no stable diegesis. There's no real logic to its world. The opening scene, for example, takes us from the diegesis of the sitcom world to the real world outside, which thus reframes the sitcom world as simply a set inside the actual world. But then, once outside, Gurney Slade mimes the piano playing from the theme music, thus bridging the gap between the diegetic world of the show and the non-diegetic music. Now he actually is breaking the fourth wall. In fact, the following scenes deliver multiple approaches to non-diegetic sound. First, we have Gurney's interior monologue.
A half-hour television show. Half an hour to put the world right. What can you do in half an hour? I need at least 40 minutes.
Then there's Gurney's interactions with inanimate objects and animals.
Thank you. A 21-year-old girl was found not guilty. Sir Geoffrey Jerome Quiet, home-loving multimillionaire will take over bid. Oh, we've heard all this before.
Because of the unpredictable nature of the show's diegesis, somewhat meaningless questions arise, like, can dogs and trash cans actually communicate in this world, or is it all happening in Gurney's imagination? And while it may seem appropriate with a show like this to just dismiss these kinds of questions, the series itself does sometimes play around with different points of view in order to undercut the reality of Gurney's fantasies. For instance, there's a scene where we can seemingly hear the thoughts of these people walking past Gurney, but then he says,
You can't tell what they're thinking, really, not by looking at them.
Which puts into question the validity of what we've just heard. Instead of being the genuine thoughts of the passers-by recorded for the audience, just like Gurney's own thoughts were, they are revealed to most likely be Gurney's imagining of their thoughts. Or, alternatively, the audience did hear their thoughts, but Gurney didn't. This seems just as likely as the first interpretation, given the fact that a later gag relies entirely on the fact that Gurney cannot hear the thoughts of the man sitting next to him, but we can. Another instance occurs in the scene with the vacuum cleaner ad. Gurney becomes enamored with a model on an ad who then steps out into reality. But what's significant here is that as he's walking away with her, we actually watch the scene from a different character's perspective, thus confirming that the girl is not real, that she is in fact being imagined by Gurney. But of course the great punchline of this sequence is that when the girl disappears, Gurney is left with the vacuum cleaner, which was not there when we saw the passerby's perspective, mind you. But now a different character shows up to confirm that the vacuum is actually there now. We can interpret this sequence as a satirical treatment of our relation to advertising. We fall in love with the girl, i.e. we fall prey to the fantasy sold to us by the marketing, and in the end all we're left with is a product we don't necessarily need. The fantasy is just that, an illusion that exists to sell a product. Because this show isn't just about deconstructing the formal conventions of the medium. The Strange World of Gurney Slade is also a commentary on the content of television. Indeed, during his interior monologue earlier on in the episode, Gurney comments on the state of contemporary TV, criticizing the unreality of conventional sitcom premises. Neighbors aren't really like that, he says. And later he converses with a dog who complains that Rin Tin Tin's adventures are too unrealistic. So paradoxically, the show starts from a position of dissatisfaction with the inauthentic nature of the traditional TV formula, but then proceeds to indulge in artificiality, perhaps so as to highlight the inherently illusionistic nature of television programming, thus offering a much more authentic view of the reality of this medium than those shows that purport to present a naturalistic reality. The show's thesis statement can be summed up like this: what exactly is the nature of television's artifice? And to explore this question, the show avoids any semblance of verisimilitude or any attempts at portraying real-life situations. Rather, Gurney Slade is a televisual flaneur who wanders around in that liminal space up against the fourth wall, just simply waiting for something to happen. And naturally, to tie it all together, at the end of the episode, Gurney walks into a house, a seemingly real house, that contains the characters from the beginning, from the show within the show, and also the dog he met earlier, who are all watching a TV show in which a man tries to get rid of a vacuum cleaner. After which, Gurney states,
I am a walking television show. I can't get away from them. Big Brother's watching me, and Big Dad, and Big Mum. The whole family's watching me.
The dissatisfaction from the beginning of the episode has morphed into a kind of existential dread. The gaze of millions, as Wallace calls it in his essay, is not welcomed like it is in Gary Shandling's show. Rather, it is recognized for what it truly is, an intrusion. Gurney wishes to be left alone, and so he will be as the episode comes to a close. That is, until next week's episode. The comments about privacy and the reference to Big Brother are obviously played as a joke, but combined with the episode's commentary on television's artifice and the illusions and fantasies that media constructs for an audience, this all adds up to a larger realization about television's position in our lives, in our privacy, how it constructs false reflections of real life but still intrudes on real life. The show thus becomes a kind of Brechtian exercise that confronts the viewer with their position as viewer, as gaze. Therefore, we could say that The Strange World of Gurney Slade lands on the opposite side of the spectrum from a sitcom like Gary Shandling's show, waking us up rather than sedating us, exposing the viewer to the medium's underlying tricks and dangers rather than encouraging us to be comfortable, to be at home with the illusion, mindlessly accepting it. One of the most explicitly meta TV shows in recent memory was Kevin Can F Himself, which features a multi-camera sitcom inside of the single-camera drama that explores the life of the main character's wife outside of the sitcom world, where she plans on having her husband murdered. The show sets itself up as a kind of feminist reframing of the traditional sitcom formula and its problematic conventions. The show's interest in tackling serious topics within the framework of a genre parody places it in the lineage of a show like Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman, which satirizes daytime soap operas and highlights the alienation of the suburban housewife.
We'll be back with more of our story tomorrow.
Oh, that Joan. She is so wonderful. No matter what happens to her. She's just so marvelous. I love her.
I wonder how come her hair is always in place. Have you ever noticed there's never one strand out of line?
How do you like the floor? See that glow?
What glow? Do you mean the waxy yellow buildup?
What do you mean? That can't be a waxy yellow buildup. Read the can.
Mary, you're looking at a waxy yellow buildup.
No, I'm not. I am looking at a label that says, that can't be.
Mary, I am your sister, and I'm telling you, it's not a waxy buildup there. It's a waxy buildup there.
You know, these people, I mean, they turn out about 1 million cans a week. I mean, who am I supposed to listen to, you?
Waxy yellow buildup.
It is a little yellow, isn't it?
Certainly is. Anyway, that's not what's really bothering you, is it?
The profound discomfort produced by Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman is exacerbated by the fact that it's always teetering on the edge of metatextuality, demonstrating an awareness of the tropes of its format, without ever actually breaking the fourth wall. It remains fixed in the fiction, but that fiction overflows with anxiety and abjection. The episodes where Mary is being held hostage by a mass murderer become a kind of satirical primal scene, where all the facets of American society come together to take part in this live televisual experience.
I am saying it is the sex and violence our young people are exposed to on television every day.
Soap from 1977 is another example. It's a sitcom that uses the conventions of, as its title suggests, soap operas. Ironically, by not taking itself seriously and by poking fun at the melodrama and excesses of the soap opera genre, Soap is able to explore a variety of serious topics in a more serialized and complex manner than the average sitcom would allow for, freely jumping from comedy to tragedy within the span of an episode.
In last week's episode of Soap, Jessica came back after walking out on Chester and told him if he was ever unfaithful again, she'd leave him for good. Jessica then went to visit Corinne, only Corinne wasn't there, but Peter was, and with another woman. Jessica was so angry that Peter was cheating on her daughter, she threatened to kill him. Corinne came home later and also found Peter with another woman. Upset, she checked into a motel, called Father Tim, and said she was going to kill herself. Father Tim rushed over and found Corinne wasn't going to kill herself. She only felt like killing herself. Actually, Peter was the one she really wanted to kill. And Peter, who was taking a shower after his busy day, much to his surprise, was, in fact, killed. Confused? You won't be after this week's episode of Soap.
These two shows are relatively early examples of American television cannibalizing itself. It's clear that TV audiences had internalized the medium's conventions well enough to allow for those conventions to be reframed in a satirical manner. And similarly to what we described in The Strange World of Gurney Slade, in Kevin Can F Himself, the irony is deployed to expose the audience to an often overlooked aspect of television entertainment. But here the critique is much more pointed, much more specific than the general takedown of television's illusionistic qualities we saw in Gurney Slade. Here irony is used to reposition the female perspective on television. The contrast of the status quo-driven sitcom and serialized drama hammers home the feeling of inertia in Allison's home life. Nothing ever changes. It's just the same old dynamics over and over again, exactly the kind of formula we get in a sitcom. This is contrasted with the non-sitcom scenes, in which Allison gains agency and takes action and the drama plays out in a serialized fashion. The way Allison behaves inside the sitcom scenes versus outside also draws on the idea that women are performing their roles for men, doing what they're supposed to do, in accordance with the conventions of a particular society, or a televisual genre. It is clearly the show's position that certain tropes popular in the sitcom format have served to minimize or even enable a number of problematic beliefs and toxic behaviors. And this actually joins what cultural critic Christopher Lasch discussed in his 1981 article, Archie Bunker and the Liberal Mind, where he describes the controversy surrounding the public reception of the popular sitcom All in the Family. He writes, "From the start, Archie Bunker became the object of passionate controversy. Did the depiction of his bigotry have the therapeutic effect of dragging a sensitive issue into the open and forcing viewers to confront their own prejudices, or did it reinforce bigotry by making it respectable?" According to Robert Wood, former president of CBS, All in the Family helped to ventilate some of the prejudices and misconceptions in American society today. Many reviewers agreed that All in the Family served an important purpose, even if it offended liberals and other uptight viewers. A CBS survey of the show's audience indicated that most viewers took it as a satire, not a vindication of prejudice. But a somewhat more extensive, though still flawed and simplistic survey concluded that the program probably reinforced prejudice instead of combating it. Laura Z. Hobson, author of Gentleman's Agreement, claimed in a 1971 New York Times article that All in the Family sanitized prejudice and made it socially acceptable. Her vigorous attack on Archie Bunker and his creators captured the indignation of an older generation of liberals appalled by what they saw as an attempt to make bigotry lovable, to clean it up, deodorize it, make millions of people more comfy about indulging in it. The creators of Kevin Can F himself seem to agree with this sentiment. The contrasting, realistic aesthetic of the non-sitcom scenes creates the sense of an outside world, where the real negative effects of the toxic behaviors played for laughs in the sitcom world are revealed. But what's interesting about this series is that the divide is not simply sitcom world versus real world, because in episode 1 we see a kind of dream sequence, a fantasy, and it is presented in the supposedly real world aesthetic, putting into question the reliability of what we see from Allison's perspective. What do these different aesthetics actually correspond to? Are they representations of different characters' perspectives? Is the sitcom world a representation of how Allison thinks Kevin perceives his world? Obviously there's no definitive answer to these questions, but this interplay of styles raises interesting points about how reality is constructed through genre conventions, specifically visual styles. More so than pitting the sitcom genre against reality, the show is actually pitting the sitcom genre against a different genre. Muted colors and a single camera format is not the aesthetic of reality, it's the aesthetic of dissatisfaction. An interior fantasy of feminist liberation constructed in opposition to the perceived male-centric sitcom format. We step out of one fantasy right into another, the gritty, anti-hero-driven serialized drama that we're now also familiar with. In doing so, the show, intentionally or not, exposes the faux realism of these kinds of prestige dramas for what they really are. Just another aesthetic, just another development in the language of television, exactly as the sitcom was. And while the sitcom was perhaps never perceived as realistic, it did serve to reinforce certain understandings of gender roles and other social dynamics, and now this new aesthetic serves to reinforce new frameworks and undercut old ones. In this light, Kevin Can F himself is not just a naive takedown of an outdated genre, it is an examination of the transformation of televisual aesthetics, and what those aesthetics tell us about how the audiences of different periods conceive of themselves and the world they live in.
I'm very, very, very proud of this. When we all came up together with the solution of like, oh, it's happy memories, which it means you get to do a traditional sitcom formula in that you get to actually achieve a third act where you learn something, but you don't do it by actually. You also get to shit on Sitcomery.
It's no surprise that the sitcom genre in particular would be so prone to ironic mockery and deconstruction, seeing as it has basically been at the forefront of the medium since its inception, and for a long time, aside from a few innovations and elaborations here and there, had remained virtually unchanged, moored to strict conventions and tropes. The family sitcom, specifically, has maintained such a strong presence across television's history. It's hard not to see it as, in some sense, being representative of the medium itself, because of how it reflects the audience's own relationship with television, a relationship usually centered around the familial hearth. For those who grew up watching TV, which at this point is basically everyone, that piece of furniture generally was, in a way, the center of the house, and the family sitcom, in its ideal symmetry, reflected that space back to us. And so, as irony made its way in, a generation of writers were quick to jump on the occasion to tear down the sanctity of that family hearth as represented in the sitcom.
Hey, don't change that channel! We're watching that show.
That's how you get a show like Family Guy, where the family unit is no longer sacred. It is taken for granted that what we see here is just a convention that is to be toyed with, deconstructed, mocked. We've seen how irony can be used to draw attention to the mechanics of representation on television, and how a particular genre can reinforce or subvert hegemonic views. But here, irony is a purely nihilistic exercise that subverts simply for subversion's sake, for the satisfaction of seeing something beloved torn down. If Family Guy has been looked down on for so many years, it's probably because of this nihilism, this crude disregard for any kind of convention or attempt at sincerity. There is a shell of a generic family sitcom in there somewhere, but it's always overshadowed by the constant barrage of cutaway gags, transgressive storylines, and metatextual comments that demonstrate nothing but scorn for the traditional sitcom structures it sometimes chooses to adhere to. The French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard drew a distinction between the grand narrative and the little narrative, or petit récit. The grand narrative is a totalizing understanding of the world, an authoritative framework, whereas the little narrative is localized, relative, contradictory, and it therefore destabilizes authority and the established framework. For Lyotard, the tendency toward little narratives is a defining feature of postmodernism. While Family Guy didn't invent the cutaway gag, it's the show's insistence on destroying the internal logic of its world through the overuse of these non sequiturs that makes it stand out as particularly postmodern, in my view. Family Guy is a show that is constantly poking holes in itself, whether that's in the show's diegetic logic, its moral fabric, or, of course, its fourth wall. Family Guy is littered with metatextual jokes that foreground the show's production. There's even an entire episode where the characters of the show record an audio commentary for a fictional in-universe, that is, if that means anything anymore, episode of Family Guy. But of course there's no better representative of this kind of irony-induced nihilism on modern television than Rick and Morty. Just as Family Guy's overabundance of non sequiturs serves to undermine the internal logic of the show's world, we could say that Rick and Morty's multiverse similarly serves to undermine grand narratives by relativizing them. After all, there are infinite variations of every single supposedly important narrative going on in this universe at any given point in time. If we don't like the direction this world is taking, we can just step over into another almost identical one, as we see in episode 6 of season 1. Naturally, what happens in this episode, Rick and Morty abandon a universe that, to them, seems irredeemably ruined, and step into a parallel universe, leaving their original family and friends behind, also serves to undermine the sanctity of the family unit. If there are an infinite number of virtually identical copies of you and your family out there, is your family bond truly special, truly unique, and worth preserving? Of course, this also changes the viewer's relation to the characters. They are viewed as disposable. They could be killed off at any time, and it probably wouldn't really matter. This is pushed to the extreme in Season 5, Episode 3, where we witness a series of decoy families getting slaughtered one after the other, with no real inkling of which one is our quote-unquote real family until the very end. The nihilism present all throughout Rick and Morty is somewhat surprising given the fact that Dan Harmon's previous series, Community, blended meta-comedy with a strong sense of emotional sincerity. It's interesting then that Harmon's writing would, in a sense, devolve into a seeming inability to commit to sincerity, content instead to continuously reiterate the meaninglessness of existence.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
Yeah, welcome to the club, pal.
Half the time the show doesn't even seem capable of committing to a message, preferring instead to make the bare effort of alluding to a message, but proudly standing clear of ever having to actually endorse one. And when the writers do actually attempt to say something, they're so insecure about it they feel the need to reassure the audience at every turn that they know the message is obvious, so it's okay. It's not laziness, it's irony.
Does he like it? It's a metaphor for capitalism, Morty. What do you think? Wow, I thought my capitalism metaphor was on the nose.
It seems clear to me that this kind of irony is a dead end. It only negates, never creates. Rick and Morty may be more competently composed thanks to Harmon's hyperfluency in story structure, but is the show really getting at anything deeper than something like Family Guy? In fact, aren't both shows gesturing towards the exact same kind of artistic nihilism? One born from boredom, dissatisfaction with the conventional dynamics of the sitcom format? In fact, was Brian's death not made even more significant than the countless times we've seen Rick's or Morty's mowed down precisely due to the fact that Brian, as a character, was endowed with genuine humanity, whereas the characters in Rick and Morty are repeatedly reminded of their insignificance in the alleged grand scheme of things. Brian's death was an extremely cynical decision made by writers and producers seeking to revive interest in a stagnating series with a slowly dwindling viewership, and he returned only a few episodes later. But do people not watch Rick and Morty precisely because it kills the dog every episode, so to speak? The main difference being that the writers of this show take pride in how elegantly they do it. Each episode conjures the question, through what narratively labyrinthine construction will they lead this poor dog to his inevitable but ultimately insignificant demise this week? We certainly can't deride Harmon and his team for lack of talent in this respect. They know what they're doing when it comes to nihilistic mindfuckery. They've got it down to a science. But it's hard to ignore the fact that, whether it's on Rick and Morty or Family Guy, this desperate need to transgress, to subvert, to undermine, just feels tired at this point. Without a real project, irony can seemingly only ever spiral out into futility, into a nihilistic infinite regress of self-awareness. As Lewis Hyde writes, irony has only emergency use. Carried over time, it is the voice of the trapped who have come to enjoy their cage.
Peter. Hi, sorry to interrupt. Seth MacFarlane.
Holy crap, it's the mouse from Sing. I'd recognize your voice anywhere.
Okay, settle down. I'm actually here to tell you there's no need to talk sense into Lois, or for anyone to leave the show, because none of you are real. You're all TV characters, voiced by me, Alex Borstein, Seth Green, and Mila Kunis.
Hey.
Hey, what's up?
Hi, everybody.
Wait, what?